What else? FF16 had a good trailer. Nothing else to really say. It was good. I am excited for it when it eventually comes out in 2024. Oh, but it comes out in 2023. Nope. It's a PS4 exclusive in 2023. A PlayStation 5 exclusive. And then after 6 months, I think literally like December 31st, it becomes, it's going to go multi-platform. And hey, to be fair, I'm a patient guy. I can wait. I don't mind. The worst that'll happen is that it'll have patches to fix bugs. We were actually getting into a bit of a conversation during the stream. Someone in the chat was talking about how exclusives are obsolete. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that there are many instances where exclusives make sense. So, like, for instance, there are games that just straight up would not have been published or have been made if they were not exclusives. There's a lot of games that are picked up by someone like Sony or Microsoft, and they say, hey, we think that your game has some market potential, but it just needs more marketing. So we'll give you money. We will act as a publisher. We'll give you money to finish the game. We'll handle marketing for you. The biggest caveat is that you have to be exclusive to the PlayStation console. At least, I'm sure whether or not it's timed can get worked out in the thing, but it has to have some sort of exclusivity. And like in my mind, that makes sense. Like if you're going to be devoting resources into making a game happen, I think it makes a lot of sense to want it to be exclusive to your system. That seems fair to me. Like a fair trade-off, at least. And now, again, you could argue, like... I was thinking, like, in what world would that not be an issue? And what world would we not need to have exclusives? And it would be a world where... Let's say there were no exclusives to any consoles. In order for that to work... Well, that's the thing. There would basically... I don't see a viability for it, and I'll tell you why. Number one is that, okay, there is a very real cost to a game being multi-platform. Like, optimizing a game for multiple consoles actually requires time and money. And people. In a lot of ways you might not even suspect. Like, yes, there's a hardware thing. Like, say you have two consoles that have significantly different architectures. Like the PS3 and the Xbox 360. Totally different. PS3 was really weird and strange. And it took a long time for developers to figure out how to develop for it. Or to kind of like maximize, draw the real power of the console out. You need people who know how to do that. You need time, you need money. And it's just straight up like, yeah, that's a challenge. Mighty Number 9 was like destroyed in development because they had to develop for like 7 different console SKUs. They had to develop because it was a cross-gen game. It was on like PS3, PS4, 360, Xbox One, the Xbone, Wii U, and PC. Yeah, and PC. Yeah. No, yeah, that is 7. Okay. I was counting right. Yeah, literally like 7 different consoles that they had to develop for. And it just weighed it down so heavy. Obviously, that's like a bit of an exception because that was at a specific time where stuff was still expected to be cross-gen. If it had been released a couple years earlier or a couple years later, probably wouldn't have had that issue. But that happened. That stole development time away. And it required, because different consoles, like the weakest one of those was, I believe, the Wii U. so that you have to develop for the lowest common denominator. It has to be playable on the weakest system. So they made a game that it worked on the Wii U when it wasn't bricking it, and it did not at all take advantage of the PS4 hardware. Pizza explosions. There's also another factor that a lot of people seem to forget, which is there is a very real cost of, beyond the development, there's the whole oh goodness, why is the word escape? Compliance test. Compliance testing is a rigorous process. Compliance testing, for those of you who don't know, is basically when you want to submit a game to be released onto a console maker's console, onto their system, you have to pass a test that they have, which it ensures a lot of things. Basically, all of them they'll all have different requirements that you have to meet, but it'll be very basic things from does the game have a bug that will brick your console? Does it? Okay, yeah, you can't release the game. Things like that. Down to even things I seem to recall Sony or Microsoft having a stipulation about when you have text in game or some kind of graphic in game that tells displaying the buttons on the controller, press X to do this. They have a thing the X, it has to be presented in a specific way. You can't, for instance, I guess you can just type an X or something I don't know the specifics, but there's things about okay, how do you display the buttons in game? How do you show those? There's a brand standard essentially that you have to conform to, that they want for whatever reason. Every single console maker has this, and it is rigorous. It is there are people at QA departments and QA firms whose role it is they do compliance. They do compliance checks, and they know front to back the whole compliance check, because sending in a game for compliance, number one, it's the process is difficult. Or the test itself is difficult, but it also costs money. It literally costs money to submit a game for compliance, because it takes resources from the console manufacturer, because they conduct it. Or they at least maybe pay for someone to conduct it. So there's costs associated with all of these things. You have to pay people in QA to be on compliance, so that you only have to do compliance once. You have to do a compliance check when you put out a patch for a game. Just a patch on a console. And maybe all this stuff is much more, the technical limitations, the compliance headaches, all this stuff could very well be feasible for a decently sized developer, but there's a lot of developers who are 20 people. And they don't have the resources to make a game multi-platform on everything. Obviously, if everything was on everything, that would be awesome. But it's not feasible or realistic or even good. You could make the argument. I don't know if I would necessarily make this argument, but I can see a logic behind it that optimizing a game for one specific platform, this is going to, the Xbox One has this amount of power possible. We are going to maximize it, and we're going to devote all our resources into drawing out everything that this console can do. Excuse me. Could be better overall for the game. If you just want to focus on and design everything around the limitations and the abilities of one specific system. You also have to, remember, there's small developers. There's developers who are literally one person. I mean, we were just talking about Vampire Survivors was made by one guy. Now he's working with a couple other people. I think the team is 3, 4, maybe 5 people in total. And I think one of them is composer It's a very small team. And, like, when he was developing Vampire Survivors, he didn't really have the money, I don't think, to go through the whole process of, like, putting it on anything other than Steam. So, like, there's a lot of developers who are small like that, who don't get nearly the success that VS did, who are just putting games out, and, like, they can only really do it on, like, a PC platform, and it's just not viable to put it out on consoles. I think there are real legitimate reasons for why something would only be developed for one console. There's business reasons, of course, but there's also practical reasons. And, here's another one. Wait, what was I going to say? Oh, I had it in my head literally a second ago. Jeez. Oh, I totally lost my train of thought. Wow. Reasons that something would be console... imagine... Okay, so trying to imagine a world in which everything comes out on everything. Let's say all those restrictions were lifted. Let's say it was easy. You could just snap your fingers, flick a line of code, say, Xbox compatibility equals 1. What then would be... It just doesn't fit, like, I guess, honestly, a capitalist system. If multiple different console makers want... If there are multiple different console makers, how do you differentiate between which system to buy? This was a problem that popped up in the early 80s in the American console market when the crash happened here, which is that there's too many consoles and no one really can tell the difference, because there isn't much of a difference, to be honest. So what would be the difference? And I guess it would be services. I guess it would be something like PlayStation Now, but how would you differentiate? How many features can you really have to differentiate both of your systems, or three of your systems? I guess, the Switch has its portable thing. What would like, I don't know. Like, if everything came out on everything, it doesn't make sense in an environment where there are multiple console makers who are vying to make a better product. And that's the other thing, is, let's say there was only one console maker and we are still in a capitalist system. That would not be good either, because as time has shown, when only one, especially in the games industry, if you have a monopoly over something or total control over it, you usually just, like, what always happens, it's just it starts degrading, it gets worse, it gets more user unfriendly, because fuck you, where are you gonna go? It's like cable companies in the United States. It's not, it would be nice. It would be nice to be able to play anything, anytime. But I think that there's very real practical reasons for why we would have to be living in a very different world for something like that to be possible. So I still do think that there is a real legitimacy to consoles being games being console exclusives. That's even before getting into something like Nintendo, who literally owns and develops in-house their own IPs. Like a Mario game coming out on the Xbox. Oh, how do you handle something that, like, if Nintendo wants to do the Wii, and it make a game around motion controls, how then would you put that on something like the Xbox 360? How do you integrate? Does Microsoft now have to make a motion peripheral? They try. I think for the foreseeable future, and to be honest, I think exclusives have gotten a lot I feel like they've gotten a lot better. I'm glad that timed exclusives are much more common now. Excuse me. That's in my mouth. I'm glad timed exclusives are becoming more of the norm from the looks of it. Again, I don't play a lot of recent games. I think the Game Pass thing is like a decent way to kind of like, I don't know. The Game Pass thing that Microsoft has been doing, it seems like it could be a decent way. It could also be like a solution for streaming, like if that's a direction that they want to go in. Streaming could be a way to potentially overcome those things, but I think that there's a lot of problems with game streaming, and I doubt it will be taking off anytime soon. Yeah, I will say, for the people who don't like console exclusives, again, totally understandable. I don't necessarily like console exclusives, but I think that it makes sense why they exist. To throw a bone to those people, there are games which just straight up don't have to be console exclusive. That just don't. Like, FF16, I think, is a good example of a game that does not have to be console exclusive. It does not have to be a PS5 only game. Square, they've got enough money. They've got enough money to publish it. They've got enough money to market it. They've got enough money to send in as many compliance checks as they want and pay those people to do all that. It's an instance where it's an exclusive for business reasons, just pure and simple, just business politics. Because it's a Japanese company, they have an existing relationship with PlayStation. They've had it since the '90s, since the late '90s, since like FF7. Sony wants it, so they threw around their weight, and it's going to be a PS5 exclusive, or is it not PS4 too? I don't remember. I think it's PS5 exclusive. But they said, okay, but obviously they want a bigger market, and that's why it's a timed exclusive. Maybe timed exclusives are dumb because they're just for games that could have been multi-platform. Yeah, and hey, speaking of multi-platform stuff, a lot of people were upset that there was not really any Xbox announcements at the Game Awards. They got snubbed. From any kind of, or just, I don't know. I think it also has to do with the fact that Xbox just does not have a very strong, just don't have a lot of very strong, like, exclusive lineup. It's really just been Game Pass. I think it's going to take a while before we see Xbox really start to come back with exclusives, if they ever really do, or if they just want to focus more on Game Pass stuff and they'll throw out a Halo game every now and again.